In a world of fractured stories, timelines buried, and truths erased, one project dares to ask the question, what if everything you thought you knew about history was wrong? This is GTR, Genesis, Timeline and Roots. A 5,025-year simulated walkthrough tracing a melanated Adam back to 4000 BC. Over the last decade, new revelations confirm a black origin for humanity, from European vaults to tribal memory, Babylon to Britain. This is not just history, this is a challenge, a simulation, a movement. Meet the man behind GTR Dr. McDonald II, Caymanian, British, Jamaican, haplogroup E and stateless for 26 years. Now a global explorer, 119 countries and counting. A hedge fund lawyer, a UK chartered accountant, a seeker of the lost archives of our people. But the question remains, if all black people came out of Africa, does that make us only African? Or are we also European, Scottish, Native American, Jacobite Hebrew, Asian? GTR exists to answer that question. You felt it your entire life, that there's something wrong with the world. A splinter in your mind. That splinter has brought you here, to GTR. Whites can't trace their roots before the 1800s. Where's ours? Where are the tribes? The languages, the kings, the queens, the true Hebrews? Where did the giants go? Where are the Neanderthals? Angels, aliens? Why do we speak in so many tongues? Was Babel just a myth? A memory? History has holes. Hollywood has lied. The system was never made for us to remember. Only 5 to 8% of people today are white. And what about the 1800 stories and postcards of the cabbage babies? But nearly all history books center their story. That doesn't add up. Atlantis, lost cities, vanished civilizations, or were they erased? Try GTR. Take the red pill and awaken to the truth of your ancestors. Or take the blue pill and keep dreaming a fantasy. GTR. A simulated walkthrough of Black Hebrew history and eschatology. This is the beginning of remembering.
GTR Publishing.
Okay, we're back with episode 6, the story of the McDonalds. So we have R and O on one side, and then we have E being the oldest, most populous haplo. That's my haplogroup. And you have A, B, C, D. And those are the polar ends for men. For women, it would be L for one side for melanated original mankind, and then H would be on the other side, whether it be Caucasus or Meadow cabbage baby linked. And it's not a derogatory label. God knows, I mean, I have family which are such. It's clear on my family tree. Even my paternal maternal line, which is Potts, would be haplogroup R. And coming back to Sir John Alexander, it would have been something to figure out his lines, but right now I'm unable to confirm. He literally has no male descendants, like at all. Even the brothers, absolutely none. And what I wanted to do too is to include here a discussion of some of the genetic markers and the results. And I was presenting the STRs, those results from across the world. They're a mix of English, of Scottish, and it shows the Black historical connectivity. When you go from the public labs into the private space, and we are matching. But in the case of the haplogroup E's, we now connect and we match. In the case of the R's, the haplogroup R's, they're not changing. Their results don't change when you move from the mainstream to the private. They don't change. But for the E's, we see they change, a clear change. And I have a lot more matches. So we have here in the private labs, we noticed people are of haplogroup E's, they're now matching. And we see a lot more connectivity. We're seeing matches of English sounding names. We see a lot of modern day Caucasian, white appearing people who are E's. So at some point there was that mixing of, they call it meadow babies, whichever in the 800s, 1800s, and Black men, because the default color of the planet and of Europe was a melanated color, was black. And this is just a profile. Now, when I run the DNA of the haplogroup R's, I am not seeing any changes. But when you run the numbers for the E's, and it includes A's, B's, C's, and D's, the original mankind, then I am seeing a lot more connections and connectivity. And I can run through the list again, and I will show you the STR matches. These are all different DNA profiles between the SNPs and STRs, but let me go through and show you a readout. We have my dad, clearly is here the closest match. We have Wiley and Stevens and Logan. Logan, they're white, same as Grams. Grams would be white, and yeah, so Wiley, Stevens, those are Caucasian, but they're haplogroup E. They're linked to Black sub-Saharan men. Then we have Hebrew, the Yahya. We have Brownlee. Then there's the oldest McDonald, Da Costa McDonald from Grenada. I presented and showed the picture. Da Costa is showing up. We have Patua, which is from Philippines, and he was haplogroup E. There's Alan McDonald, that is our McDonald's match. When we have Philippe Stefani, the Stefani from Madagascar, it's my only modern Congolese or African match in terms of the distance. We have some matches, me and my dad, further down into Africa because of the pathway, which I'm going to show you in a minute. But this is the only, and Philippe Stefani, this French match here. This is Congolese and Malagasy. His mom is Malagasy, his father is Congolese. And the DNA, when you run his DNA, it matches with old Normandy French people and Irish, Black, melanated haplogroup E. Then there's Colquist, there's Collins, Scottish English name, Brownlee, Burke, Campbell, very Scottish name, more Yahya, more Hebrew, Davidic, more Davy. Then we have Rand. Then there's Herbert Charles. That's the white gentleman from Georgia, whose picture I showed. Herbert Charles is showing up as a match, Scottish related. He had a Black forefather. There's McGee. Then there's Colquist. There's Morrison, and more English. We have Peterson, Scottish, Corbett, Williams. We have Gibson. With Kenya, we have some African matches now because we're going towards the tail. We have a King, so a Jewish match. Mind you, I do have a few connections. People don't, or they often don't realize, and they forget maybe that Albert Einstein, I think he was the world's smartest man. He was a haplogroup E, like myself as an E, and so was Napoleon, so was Hitler, so was Mandela, the Egyptian kings, including Tutankhamun, the Wright brothers, President Woodrow Wilson. Then there's Austin, and people from the Middle East. A lot of connections, and they're all quite close. And I was able to get at these results after processing the results in private labs that change. But the haplogroup R's, because as I mentioned, there are two goalposts. Original man, E being the first haplogroup. There's E, the most populous and the oldest, then A, B, C, D. In women, it will be L. And then the other end, we're talking about H in women, and then R and O in men. So those are the haplogroups. And then everybody else sort of in the middle. The Aboriginal people, who they say is 35,000 years old, they're type S. And they're in the middle. So you have the outer bands, and then you have in the middle. So they're clearly not older than E. E being the oldest. E should really be A, but they made it, to confuse people, they made it the fifth DNA category box. Let me show you my other pathway. So here it is that we have what the scientists have come up with to show the pathway from Africa. I know I'm Igbo, I know I'm Nigerian, I know I'm Yoruba, and some branch of this went out into the, well, I mean, they class it to be the Mesolithic. These timelines and ages don't really gel because we talk about a condensed timeline. GTR is maximum 5,000 years. So some pathways went to the Middle East and Egypt. We know I have some distant Egypt relatives. And then you see a pathway going to Scotland. And that's where I come in, and then from Scotland to the Caribbean. And it includes the other cousins like Dr McDonald and Orit and Hezron and Chris and Orlando McDonald. And his name is Mac with the MAC. And a host of others that have come up and we have tested and shown the connectivity to. And so I wanted to, again, present this pathway, that this is the ancestral pathway by the SNP tracker. And this is a scientific site tracking the male Y chromosome. And you can see here that the pathways lead and stem from West Africa. I know Igbo and Yoruba, and they meanders through to Middle East, to Saudi Arabia, Kuwait. We've seen those matches. Then a direct path that takes you all the way through the Southern Europe into Scotland. And then from Scotland, you have the branching out. We have the Dr McDonald, we have the Horace and Hezron and Chris and all the persons who I mentioned, the Joseph and Mark. All those profiles are evidence from the Scottish links coming from Scotland, the old Jacobites. Europe was melanated. And you see it takes a path through Italy, through Rome. And you can see that pathway going from Africa, extending across Southern Europe into Scotland. And then from Scotland, we have a dispersal within the Caribbean, which is where I came from, which accounts for me. And that pathway is clear. This is a scientific site. This is an independent site. This is not linked with any church or other affiliation. It is a completely scientific site. But the timeline we have to look at, because what modern is in the last 100, 200 years. Medieval, that orangey box that they've kind of put me, or medieval meaning 500s to 1600s. Well, if the year 580 became 1582, 582 became 1582, then there's no medieval Middle Ages. That's just made up. And so that's the pathway that we see here. Now, in discussing this pathway, and I wanted to leave this on screen, I wanted to take the anecdotal and other, type information that I've gleaned on my family, and to try and to come back to yes, to come back to the point making about my ancestral roots. So, my dad's, if you want to look at it, my mom's side was pretty clear. We have pathways that includes the Sebruns and the Ramlals. So on her mom's side, there were Sebruns being white, haplogroup R. We're talking about Indian and white, and then on her paternal side, my mom's paternal side, the Ramlal, Southern Indian, melanated but haplogroup O. But again, metal baby linked, you have the O's and the R's. So that was her father's side. And then her mom's mom was a U, so one of those hybrid middle categories, a U, and that was her haplogroup. My father's family now, that requires a bit more time to, compress and to take apart, to deconstruct. I always knew that, my dad's mom was mixed race. When my father, and I'm pulling from stuff that he said, and his sisters, when it was ready for him to marry, he wanted to have, the best, and find the best lady around town with the most, with the highest pedigree. And he looked for someone, the Potts family. They owned their own mountain, Porter's Mountain, and they were prominent, and they were largely Caucasian. And listening to the words of my late grandmother's first cousin, Daphne Potts was my mom's mother, and her first cousin just passed. Her name was Lilith Potts. Lily Potts is affectionately called Little Potts. And her father, William, was Daphne's, will be the uncle. I mean, Daphne's father, was George. George and William were brothers. They're both Potts. And so he was telling me the story of how there was some communication and migration going on between Green Island, Hanover, and Fort William. So I called up the map. When I look at the map of Jamaica in the, call it 600s, or you would say the 1600s, you would see a place that had Scottish names. Okay. And I had to get this map from Scotland, and it was not available at all in Jamaica. So this is a map of Jamaica in the 1600s, 600s. And you notice that on here, there's no mention of Kingston, no mention of Mobay, no Ocho Rios, no Clarendon. My mom is from Clarendon. It's clearly a map that has these Scottish names: Edinburgh, Arthur's Seat. My dad's place of birth and his father's place of birth, Fort William. And according to Lil Potts, there was that connectivity, that strong connectivity between what was described as Elgin Town and Fort William. And according to her, before she passed, she said that they were loading up donkeys and horses and taking things from Elgin Town to Fort William, cutting across the island. But note the topography, and there are mountains there, so they have little trails to go and connect between the two places, rather than taking the coastal path where it's Negril. But that place was referred to as Glasgow, and again another Scottish name. And on this map, when I looked at the DNA of others like Orrit McDonald, the Black McDonald, he's haplogroup E. He's from Mandeville, Manchester area. That's Arthur's Seat. Then others that came from the St. Mary area, that's Stirling Castle. Some from Portland, that's Leith Hall. And even in Edinburgh, certainly my great-grandfather would have passed in Morgan's Bridge, which is Grange Town. That is earmarked on this map as Glasgow. So we have these places with Scottish names, and they mean something. I mean, it's clearly, this is Jamaica, and I couldn't find this in Jamaica. I had to go to Scotland to get this map. And so that's, very, it's telling, and it tells a story of the country, of what it was like. We know the Scottish Masons were very powerful. A lot of materials are hidden and not available. I visited churches in Grange Hill, which is Morgan's Bridge. That's where James McDonald died. So when you look at the family tree, when I was looking and telling you about James McDonald and Daniel, and telling you about William, that would be James's son. So it's William Edward, my dad's dad. So if you want to look at the hierarchy, you have a genealogy. It's me, my dad, Wilton Sr., William Edward, his dad, Daniel, his father, William, around 1840, and then James. James would be around late 1790s. And the whole Sleet type McDonald's that landed in Jamaica, they're not tracked. They're not cataloged. They're not found. It's like they don't exist. They don't exist in the literature. You had books written on Clan MacDonald by Alasdair MacDonald. And there's a 3-volume set, almost invisible. One reference to a James, and I'm not sure if that's the same James. That James came to Jamaica and died unmarried. I mean, who goes anywhere in the Caribbean and dies unmarried? And he was not a member of the clergy. I mean, he was just a regular guy, and he goes to Jamaica and dies unmarried. And then when I called up the peerage office, which tracks royals and persons of worth, and told them about my line, about Donald I Groma and the 1500s. So 1500s would be the 500s. They said, well, we don't know much. We stopped tracking this line. We don't know anything. So again, playing dumb, as oftentimes I get in my research, in my esoteric and my research, which is not mainstream, but I'm trying to push the boundaries here. No, they stopped tracking those McDonald's. They stopped tracking them, and there's not much information. When I went to the churches where James was supposedly buried in Grange Hill, oops, dirt grave, no headstone. They don't know where he was buried really in the yard. The church records were burned because they were moldy. And I'm only going by information, bits and pieces I can get from Scotland. But I do know that Daniel lived in Little London, which goes by, you have St. Paul's, Little London, again, Westmoreland. And he was known to be a man with a fairer skin, but then he was miserable as heck, as they said. He was quite miserable. And my auntie had an image. She recognized him when she was young, and a young woman. And when she recognized and had one or two brief moments with him, when she migrated to Canada, my Aunt Mabel said, I've seen this before. This man, Prime Minister of Canada, Sir John MacDonald, reminds me of that grandfather of hers, that Daniel character. Not in the exact same way, but just there are features. And the guy has a thick nose and curly hair. I mean, the first Prime Minister of Canada. But those are the pieces of information that's just missing from the puzzle. And that's what I'm trying to capture and preserve for my son and his son to follow. That the McDonald's represent something, not just some burger fast food chain. The McDonald's represent the substantive family, and that the name has been hijacked. I mean, the current head of Scotland, the title of Lord of the Isles held by the famous Somerled, no longer Lord of the Isles. That title is now with the current monarch in the UK and Britain, King Charles III. When he holds a title of the Scottish clan of MacDonald, he's the Lord of the Isles. That title is with the current king. Okay. Well, whatever was left of the powers in the MacDonalds, that's just going away now because they're selling Armadale Castle. They're selling out, who knows, Chinese or Japanese or whoever is going to buy them. And what's that telling you? What posterity, what legacy? These were Black Jacobites, melanated people, and that history is cut off. It's about to be lost. The new owners come in, and we have barely any records in Jamaica. So this is the travesty. This is the situation we find ourselves in. Melanated people just searching for their history. Again, look at the painting. I am totally mesmerized by the painting in my background. We have the Moorish quadrille, and we have this painting, which is clear as day that this Europe that we understand and trying to accept was melanated. We have so many countries. We have Lithuania and Poland and Sweden and Germany, and again Poland again, all on this slide, and we can see that clearly. It's been verified and not on public display. Just sad and shocking and shameful. And so we are chained, and we are bound by this history that is not our history. It's someone else's history. And beyond melanated Europe, you have a white Jesus on display. So I wanted to say a few words about what even my sisters, and it's a painful thing. This is a subject that is near and dear to me, and I was hoping, again, my dad would present. He's in Jamaica now, and I'm back in Poland. But what I wanted to say is that the pieces I put together, his father, he was a difficult man. He was a strict disciplinarian. He was a ladies' man, before he got married. He was popular, but he had a certain decorum about him. He was strict, and there was this thing about him. Obviously, there was some mixing going on, but he remained a Black man, a haplogroup E. But the comment was made by one of my aunties, my dad's sisters, that he wanted to make sure, and he found himself a woman, not just of class and rank, the Potts, and they were white. Like I said, they owned their own mountain, Porter's Mountain. But he didn't want to have any nappy head kids. And I have to say that, to declare that. So he brushed his hair. His hair was a little curly. His eyebrows were bushy and thick. His moustache was thick. And so, a lot of Black people, I am part Black, I'm Indian, I'm white, but, beards and stuff, a lot of melanated people, we don't do well with facial hair. We just don't, for the most part. So he obviously had some mixture, especially when you look at his father, Daniel, and how it was put by my auntie, Mabel, that the first Prime Minister of Canada, which clearly is more of a white man, but, had thick nose and curly hair, so mixed himself, reminded her of Daniel, and that's William's father. And so there was some mixing going on, where metal baby ladies were getting with Black men and mixing and then changing the profile. Because what we are to understand is the slave trade happened, which I'm not buying. And then the masters were white, and they would go and have their way with the slave ladies, the slaves, the women, and produce mixed race babies. And a lot of the high classes in society, high color, mixed race, we just assume, yes, of course, their forefathers were white. So with the darkening of Europe, with this picture being painted, no, it clearly were black men taking themselves, because the order of the day was that we had to introduce a new superclass. And that class would be somehow, I mean, look at it, my DNA, but look at the results, the Logans, the Wileys, the Stephen, the different families on there are showing up as white today, but they have sub-Saharan DNA, all of my connections. So with the Daniel story, with the mixing going on, even my grandfather, William Edward, was of mixed race. It leads back to a sub-Saharan black man, a black Scottish Jacobite royal. And that's the only logical conclusion. And they settled in Green Island, and then they moved inland because of maybe some storm and, weather and erosion. They moved inland and moved closer to Grange Hill, to Fort William. And that is really how this journey and this migration and path happened. So I could say this. I mean, a few more words about my late grandfather is that I missed meeting him. He died when he was around 56 years old. It was a short life. He was a district constable. He was arresting people. He had the powers of arrest. He was a lawman. He rode a horse. He always had some pressed shirts and suits that he wore. He wore a hat. You would never see him without a hat. My father took on some of these. I mean, my dad is well dressed. I feel proud of how he carries himself. But my late grandfather, it's a missed opportunity. I met my mother's dad, Ezekiel Ivan Ramlal, an Indian man, and he passed in 2010. And then, of course, my maternal grandma, and then my paternal grandmother. I knew Daphne Potts, but I never met the man. I never met William Edward. So I was born in 1975, and he passed in 1968. And even the circumstances, he was had the powers of arrest. There was stories that he was about to arrest someone who had committed some local crime or so, and he died. He got hit in the head. He was assaulted. He bled out, and there was something but or poisoned. So his story was poisoned, or he got hit in the head. But he passed at the age of 58. And that was just tragic. Really affected my father too, because he was taking care of his family and had to send money home, and he had to work so many jobs and still stay in school. That was a difficult time. And then he started to date and court my mother, Sarita Ramlal, who, had a better economic, and family, set up in such a way where parents were alive. And so, and of course they had businesses, the trucking business, and they had animals, and they made money on that too. But this quaint place of Fort William that seemed so, so backward, it's on this map. It's on the map. And Clarendon and Maypen and places where even St. Elizabeth, where a lot of light color McDonald's and other people who have assumed the name, it's not on the map. They're not. It's not here. So this is what I'm, piecing together with the Black nobility, with the history of the McDonald's and how they operated, how they were, and that there was some mixing, obviously, but Black paternal and white fair-skinned maternal. Then, obviously, Black men took upon themselves Black females, because my William's wife, yes, she was Daphne. She was half Black, but his Daniel's wife was a Black woman. She was Lydia Hines, and she was Black. So eventually, I mean, the color changes, but there was this new social order that was implemented somewhere in the 1800s or 800s. But yeah, I would have loved to at least meet him and to spoke just to speak to him, and what I got from the sisters, and it's something that, my dad doesn't talk about much because his dad was a bit distant, yet he had a lot of stories. According to Aunt Mabel, he would tell about story of the Nancy spider. He would tell stories about labor and taking the initiative and why you should work. He had all these, little quips about him, and he would just encourage them. But yes, he had to have his breakfast in a certain way. He had to have his afternoon tea. He was had to have the shirts ironed and pressed. And if my father things were not done, he would not, spare the rod. And even my dad had, went to bed, I think, without any food. He and his mother passed him some sort of bread at one time, or one episode or two episodes, because he went to bed because he didn't do certain things. He didn't do chores, and so he doesn't talk about it. And the siblings moved away. Carmen moved to the UK. Mabel went to Canada. A lot of the siblings went to the US. His brother stayed behind, but again, he's not really connecting with the family, and he just prefers to have a carefree lifestyle and hang out in the grill. But this is it, that there was this, I think you could see this trauma, this pain that you could see, but my father has dealt with and had to deal with throughout his life, and not getting that from his own father, losing him early, but him not communicating. And a lot of people in the Caribbean, it's not just my father, but say, how was my grandfather? Please be quiet. Shut up. Be quiet. You don't need to know that. That's big people stuff. And a lot of the older folks, they should be encouraged to speak and tell the stories, but they don't, because of the lack of knowledge, or they are tied in with the Masons, and they can't speak about things. There's a lot of Masonic knowledge, and there's about the records and the history and the real history that can't be divulged. And then you get these blank spots. And then I come to a place like Poland, and I'm looking for my wife's family. And these are Jewish towns like Zhelehov, very Jewish, and they were not bombed. They were not affected by war. Yet there are no records. There's no information. There's no history. Nothing beyond the 1890s. There's ghost records. So they have no records, and we have no records. Then, for goodness sake, who has records? We all just fell out of the sky. Brown people and black people, melanated people are not supposed to talk about it. They don't know. And in all good, legit cases, they just don't know. And then the white folks, well, there's some that have these long pedigrees. But when you dig deeper, like, Matalan, Issa, Siaga, Manly, Alberga, when you look at the names and you go to the trees, you don't find much. You don't find much. You have blank spots and assumptions. Oh, we're European. And you have to take our word for it because we're European. Well, sorry, I'm very sorry to disappoint, but if you're a haplogroup R, you could be European. Being white and stuff doesn't mean that, you're not, you may have that black DNA. This is, you don't know until you do the test. So if you're an E or A, B, C, D, then you're original man. You are tracing your roots back to Adam, the beginning. If you're R or O, you have a short history. Nothing beyond the 1800s, 800s. I'm sorry. I heard to be the bearer of bad news. But that's the history. And assuming something else, it's you being something that you're really not. And you are hijacking our history in order to exercise power, control, dominion over black and brown people. And this is happening for 100 years, not thousands of years, 100 50, 200 years. The Berlin Conference, what was that about? That was to ensure that the newly constituted, formed white Europe would have would have homes, would have uh, a livelihood, a cushy. I liken Europe, having lived in Europe for a few years. It's like one big dolly house. It is so pristine. I mean, what can you do with Paris? What can you do with the major city? What can you do with Hamburg? What can you do with Berlin? All they do is just demolish some old stuff and rebuild. I mean, all these cities have been developed. I mean, you go to Africa, you go to call it the third world, and then you see dusty roads and lack of infrastructure. I mean, there are buildings. I mean, we're not talking about people swinging from anything. We're talking about buildings, but you don't have the same pristine, prime condition that you would polished condition you'd find in Europe or parts of USA and Canada. And you look at some of these major cities and countries that I say are advanced and developed. Then how did they get to that point? They extracted a lot of wealth. Africa still has so much resources. It has, more than 80, some people say more than 90% of its total, total capacity, and just a fraction was used. And so the saying goes, the world needs Africa, but Africa doesn't need the world. We're all coming out of Africa in some shape or form. Even those meadow cabbage babies, they still had DNA that was inclusive of a Black melanated ancestor. And so there's still that link to Africa, even though there's no direct link, like being born or conceived and passing from one father, mother to another, but it's still a connection. There's still a human connection. And I'm not going to deprive anyone, creed, race, ethnicity of their humanity. I would never go there, ever. How could I, when I am 3 races in one, and my wife is Polish. I mean, as Polish as modern day Polish, but again, this painting here is Poland. This painting was painted in Poland at the Royal Castle in Warsaw. And so we have to appreciate and recognize that the world is not what it seems, and it's not. It was a different world. We're living in a world that has been constructed based on lies and misinformation, and to benefit a certain set of people. And they exercise dominion and control and ownership over everything. And they decide what we eat, how we spend, where we live, what we borrow. We become debt slaves. And this at the same time, disconnecting the treasures and riches of Africa from the banking system, the global banking system. It's disconnected from, if you were to put just a fraction, let me bring it home here. The world probably has about 200 trillion of gross domestic product, right? 200 trillion. Africa has assets in the quadrillions, even quintillions, but definitely quadrillions. So if you put Africa's resources even a tenth on the world banking and financial system, it will be bankrupt in an instant, because that's the classic definition of hyperinflation and too much money chasing too few goods. You can't produce enough to satisfy demand, and prices skyrocket. And what good is that? Who can afford a loaf of bread that costs $1 million? So they keep the system in place to benefit, again, the few. And we're trending towards a system that even those big shops like BlackRock and those big groups, they sense the West is in decline, and they are all for making money by going to Africa, doing business in the global south, doing business in certain Eastern countries. And that's the trend. Then that's what's happening. So we have to all wake up and we need to change this narrative. We can't have 57 million millionaires with only 1-2% black. We can't have 3,000 billionaires with 0.5% black. And meantime, the people of color are, as they say, catching hell. We pay so much, and we don't have a proportionate taxation system. We have a taxation that is regressive, and it taxes the lower end, the socioeconomic ladder. They pay more proportionally. I mean, they have paid $1,000 and they have to pay practically half in taxes. And then someone who makes $10 million pays a few $1,000s. And that's not fair or proportionate at all. And so we have to take a real stock about where we're going as a society. And it all starts with that truth. I've said it before, truth and reconciliation. Just what South Africa tried to achieve. You have truth and reconciliation. But in order to reconcile, please, you need to have the truth. And when you dress up information, anything, when you dress it up, it becomes a lie. And again, we live in Christendom. We all pretend and we put ourselves out that we are Christians, worshiping even God in spirit and truth. And if we paint Jesus that color, the wrong color, are we truly worshiping him in spirit and truth? And then what effect is that going to have on our brothers and sisters? And there's some that say here, it doesn't matter. Color doesn't matter. Well, the fair thing would be to paint Christ according to your local demographic. And that would be the fair choice. It's not a correct choice because it's not historically accurate to have Christ depicted as 50 ethnicities. Because where's the truth in that? He was melanated. Christ was a brother. But instead of showing billions upon billions of images of misrepresented false white image, so that you can steal and control and allocate resources to, again, one set of people, that's not right. I mean, and no compromise is needed. So you paint Christ as a Japanese Jesus or a Korean Jesus. I mean, you have to look at historical, accuracy and truth. That truth, the cold hard truth. So let me end with that note, as the show is CMR and it promotes cold hard truth. And that's, I think, what we need in order to get through this point. Once we have the truth out there, then we can make some informed decisions, and we can decide for ourselves and our families and prepare properly for a future and operate, at a high level and with dignity and pride. There's a lot of us as melanated, a lot of brothers just resort to crime because, and I'm not saying that to get a pass and seek a get out of jail card here. It's just they just don't have many options, and you treat someone as an animal, and then you expect them to behave differently when they're treated and they have no options, and they're told that they're less than nothing. So let's work on the cold hard truth. Let's look at the truth and try then looking at options and reconciliation. So I just wanted to then just to sort of wrap up and conclude that this whole journey has taken me 5 years, and I'm still learning. I'm still learning as I go along. And sharing my relatives like Arit, as you see here, sharing other images. There's Chris. And I want the names to just stay with you. Joseph, Mark, which everyone knows in Cayman, Orlando, Horace, my grandfather, William Edward, Hezron, very Hebrew sounding name. My son, Alexander Wilton III. It's me. My father, Wilton McDonald Sr. DaCosta McDonald, our closest male relative, still alive, 108 years old in Trinidad. There's Herbert Charles. There's Alan Alexander. And then that's the great grandfather of all. That's John William. And he was born in the mid 1800s in Grenada. And he has a direct path to Scotland. Very respectable looking man, and a Euromore. So I would encourage people that they could also do deep dive and not be fearful of what you find. A lot of people in the Caribbean, in Cayman and Jamaica, they assume that they have European roots and they want to attach themselves to Europe because we're told that Europe has led the way to invent, to modernize our whole world. So they would be deserving of everything that comes from that world, from our world, from Africa. But that's not true. That's not the case. If Europe turns melanated, and I don't want to say, keep saying black and harping on black, because for some it's derogatory, but for melanated Europe, if Europe turns melanated, Houston, we're going to have a problem. And immediately, Christ could never be melanated. And so Dr. Spencer Wells wants us to accept Paul Crooks, Dr. Henry Gates, Richard Ansel Hart, Rick Kittles, Alex Haley, Dr. Leakey, and Charles Darwin. All of these gentlemen who I would have to do a deeper feature in the next episode on, and what their take is in terms of history and telling us. They're actually telling us what our history is. And the case of Dr. Henry Gates, he is not even black. He's a haplogroup R. So imagine what he has to tell me on his PBS show about haplogroup E and original man. He's an R, and he can't dictate and lecture. Paul, I don't know, because he does not follow DNA. That's Paul Crooks. He doesn't follow DNA analysis. He just follows some stories. He's inspired by the work of Richard Hart and also Alex Haley. But then Richard Hart was a white guy, and his family tree sort of falls off after 3 generations. But he wrote extensively about the slave trade. And so a lot of these gentlemen, they have, even Dr. Spencer Wells, he had that convincing story, and he laid it out that he's going to tell you where your history and your roots would lie. When he was talking about the ancient Europeans, he said that the pathway was through Turkey. Then he stopped and did a 90 degree, he just turned around, a full 180, and said, well, it would be through India into Kazakhstan and into Russia, the former Soviet Union, is where his journey took him. And then those persons, somehow through the weather, lost their pigmentation. And again, that's why they draw it out, because we're talking about thousands. Anything, I guess, can happen. It's not chalked up to some random era. Anything can happen in thousands of years, in fact, tens and hundreds of thousands of years. And so people lost their skin color and then moved from Kazakhstan and the Eastern, Russia, into Eastern Europe, and then into Western Europe. So that's why we have to press people on the timeline, because the timelines don't make sense and they must make sense. And we out for many years, even before I started this journey, that means 45 years. I was laboring under that misguided sort of belief that we just got our names from a hat, from a master, not knowing that if the slave trade happened in the way it did, or just the masters coming over from Europe, from melanated Europe, would be black themselves, there would be melanated masters. But we got our names from some master. And there are a lot of names in Jamaica that there were no masters to match. So where did you get your names? And Dr. Marie Charles, in her 22 books, she lays out all the accounts with prisoners that went and were sent to the Caribbean, and their skin color, they were swarthy, they were black, they were marked as black. And then with Guy Anderson, with his piece on the cabbage and meadow babies, the whites were sent on the orphan trains, but they were sent to Australia and South Africa in small, like, cages. That's really his accounts based on his Masonic records and those of his father's records. They have their own records, and that's what he said. He said that the cells and the cages on the boats, they were much too small for average, adult-sized people. They were kids, and they sent kids over to the likes of New Zealand, Australia, and South Africa. So not, so where people assume in the Caribbean that have light skin, and people in Australia and New Zealand and South Africa, that they belong to Europe. The minute that Europe gets its shade of dark or becomes melanated, then it questions everything. Everything on the timeline, or GTR timeline, would then make sense. And we will then rewrite our history. We will change the textbooks that we have been given. We would change the very face of Christ. And isn't that a good thing? Because in Christendom, we are told that we should worship God in spirit and truth. And I think it's time and fitting, it's time, even now that we've celebrated Christmas again, though most would agree that Christ was not born at that time, much too cold, but we just accept that. When Christ was indeed born after spring, or near closer to between spring and summer, that he would have been born to melanated parents. He would be born to a society that is melanated. Romans, not just you had this multicultural, multi-ethnic society. The Greeks were melanated, and I did a piece, and even on Facebook posting, to show what Greeks looked like. And I've traveled in North Africa too, where the Romans occupied, and 1,000 images have been defaced and vandalized, faces off, and no clear explanation for that. And we just accept it. Here in Poland, the castle of Prince Jersey, in that same painting, Morris Quadrille, 8 statues in the chapel, the oldest part of the castle, and faces are removed. So this is something that we need to examine, we need to explore, and we need to kick the tires, because it's the next generation that will be misled, confused, disenfranchised, and just lost, and become more and more, accumulating lost generations. So with that, I will sign off and leave you, and we'll pick it up, episode 7. Thank you, and good evening to all.
GTR Publishing.
A Data Dreads production.
They took the gold and hide the hand. Tell we lies and steal the land. wave their flags while we forget who we are, we not there yet. This time is for Africa. Africa. This one ain't for everyone.